Hi, I'm Alana. I use they and she pronouns.
And I'm Jessie. I use she and her pronouns.
And
We're
making
making mentions.
mentions.
Okay. Making
Your
mentions.
time.
Yeah, no. Making mentions is an organization providing radical Jewish education.
And this is the artist series where we showcase queer, Jewish, anti-Zionist artists. Today we're talking to Armor. Introduce yourselves, let us know your pronouns, where to call home, your astrological sign if you're into that, and what kind of art you make.
Hi, my name is Anna Rajagopal. I am from Houston, Texas. My sign is a Libra. Did I get that right? Or is that horoscope? Is that the same thing as astrology? Yeah. Okay. A Libra. And the art, I make a lot of written art, and I also like to combine written art and visual art.
I just want to say you're a Libra that I enjoy a lot, and that does not happen often. So,
Are you the Pisces?
yeah.
Oh, okay. I guessed that. Oh my gosh, that was amazing.
Did you really not know
Wait,
that?
that's actually really impressive.
It's really impressive.
Embarrassing.
No, that you have a gift. Okay. Sorry, let me ask the question I came to ask.
I used to be anti-Libra, and in the last year or two, I've really undergone a massive shift, and I love Libras. And
Listen, yeah,
think that they deserve more credit.
I love talking to Libras at parties. Air signs in general continue to break my heart, and it's fine. It's fine. I know exactly what I'm doing, but anyway, no judgment about you. You're great. Anyway, so tell us a little bit about what your relationship was to Judaism growing up and how Judaism shows up in your life now, if at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my relationship to Judaism growing up was overwhelmingly positive. I hate using that word, it's so binary, but it really was. I had a really beautiful relationship to Judaism, largely thanks to my very loving and wonderful family, namely my mother. I think that I was just talking to Gila Axelrod about this, the editor of New Voices, I think. But I was talking to her about growing up, my mom would always do this thing on Shabbat, which I hated at the time because it felt like a school assignment, but where she would have a Shabbat journal when I was a kid, and everyone had to write a poem for the Shabbat journal or something. And so we have this journal of half finished poetry from when I was like 12. And I feel like, I don't know, to me, that's such a good example of just the ways in which my mom artistically influenced my Judaism growing up through the written word and through trying to immerse me in art and those sorts of things. So I feel like I was lucky to have a very artful childhood in terms of Jewishness. And I think that's continued today. I think going through college is really hard. Being Jewish in college is tough because I think there's just not a lot of resources for folks who aren't necessarily Zionists, but who are anti-Zionist, but who want to immerse themselves in Jewish culture. So I think now that I'm coming out of college and fully out, graduated, I'm able to find a space. Thank you. I'm able to find a space for my Jewishness that's rooted more in art and in community. And so I think that's where I'm at right now.
I'm literally obsessed with your mom making you keep Shabbat poetry journal. Totally.
I hated it. Not I hate, that's a
Oh,
very,
yeah.
I was very annoyed because I was like, this feels like school after school. But I think
Yeah.
yes, I think my mom was really patient. I love her so much. I'm a 22-year-old teenage girl, and my mom is very patient with me. So I'm grateful for that.
That's very sweet. And I feel like in many ways, very uncommon. So I love to hear something like that. I want to start keeping a Shabbat journal now. I'm like, wait, well,
It-
that would have also hated it at the time.
yeah, because when you're 12, it's not cool. But
No, not
when
at
you-
all.
yeah, but when you're like 20 something, it's like, wow, that was really meaningful. And so I think, I don't know, I was lucky. If I ever have children, that's something I'll definitely do. I also think there's something very powerful to journaling, something very intimate. No.
Yeah, 100%. There's a section in Jew Rich's Rosh Chodesh guide on like why journaling is like sacred and spiritual, or especially around Rosh Chodesh. And I really like that framing, and I like thinking about journaling in the Jewish and spiritual context. Yeah, so I agree with that. I feel like already your art and Judaism are intermingling at a really young age with something like the Shabbat journal. But I'm also curious how other identities impact and show up in your art. So not only your Jewishness, but any other identities that you hold.
Yeah, I think, again, I feel very lucky. I keep saying that, but I feel very lucky to live in a city where I feel very anchored in my geography. And I think my geography really influences my sense of identity. And I think I'm lucky because I'm surrounded by people who look like me and people who are from the same places I am. And that is something that not everyone has. And I'm very thankful because I think Houston is, for me, just the most nurturing place I could ask to be 22 in. And I think because of that, I'm able to have a space now that didn't exist even 5 years ago, where I feel comfortable and safe expressing aspects of my identity in my art that maybe haven't always been widely accepted as art. I think definitely brownness is something really important to my art. Coming from an identity that is non-white is very important to my art. Being South Asian is really important to my art. And I think I take a lot of not inspiration, I also hate that word, but I take a lot of influence from classic South Asian art. I really like bold colors. I love traditional patterns. I like those things. And also South Asian poetry is really beautiful. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. Now, something queerness is really important to my art today. I think also that's very Houston centric because the queer community here is so strong and so artful. And I think that's not something that I've always felt comfortable creating art around. But I think now in the last 5 years, maybe a little bit less, I've felt more inclined to express myself in that way. And yeah, I think queerness, Jewishness, being South Asian, I feel like disability counts as my identity. So I'm going to say it. But I think having a reproductive disability and being neurodivergent and having a whole host of other things has definitely impacted my art. Reproductive disorders specifically, I think that's something I really take a lot of time to write about in my poetry and talk about is reproductive violence, whether it be interpersonal or through the health system. And so that's something that I feel I have to make art about it because I think it's the way I process.
That is incredible. It's fascinating that you knew exactly where we were going to go with this because we were just going to talk about your promotion for your recent shows, specifically at Holy of Holies, the art show, and then your La Voice Poetica, where you read your poetry out loud, but also as these really cool community art shows that are being put on. And I have been called out for it before. I am a very New York centric person. I don't know enough about the rest of the country. I don't know enough about the Midwest. I don't know enough about the South. So I'm really curious to hear more about, and it does not have to be a history lesson, but just curious about Houston's identity and how it's gotten to be such a haven for queer culture, for brown culture, for all of these amazing movements that are happening right now. And just if you could reflect a little bit about how that geographical home influences your work specifically.
I love that question. My senior thesis, I was a creative writing major. My senior thesis was on geographies and identity. So this is my favorite little soapbox to get on top of and scream about. But no, I am Houston's biggest fan, lovingly and hatefully. I think Houston is really unique in that everyone hates us, right? Or no one knows about us. I think the South is very easy to diss when you're in the North or Northeast. I was recently in Boston to see family and friends, and I was also in New York briefly, and just people do not like Texas. And a lot of people haven't even visited Texas and they hate it. And I'm like, no, me too, but you can't say that because I think Texas is such an artfully loving place in terms of the communities that have not even emerged, but anchored themselves and fought to survive and flourish here. I think Houston's a port city, so I think that has really been a significant kind of contributor to the ways in which Houston has been diversified. Houston has a very deep-rooted Black history, and the Black history of Houston has shaped and continues to shape the ways in which every other person exists in the city. And I think also in terms of Jewishness, Galveston had a very significant Jewish population as a result of the Galveston Plan, which I know you said no history lesson, but I took a Jewish history class from an amazing Southern Jewish history professor, and he taught us all about this Galveston Plan, in Europe to keep Jewish people from going to Manhattan because they didn't want any more Jews in Manhattan because they were worried about the reputation of Jewish people. There was a reputation of dirtiness, of that sort of thing, anti-Semitism. And so they rerouted thousands of Jews to Galveston in an effort to get them to settle in Texas and spread through the Midwest. And as a result, a pretty significant Jewish population anchored themselves in Galveston and has since kind of migrated into Houston, as far as I know. And if my professor ever hears this, he's going to correct me, which is so real of him because it's probably wrong. But I think that Houston is lucky in that it is the focal point of so much Southern identity. And there's so many other beautiful and amazing Southern cities. But for me, Houston has been the place where my early 20s have spread out. And I think, again, I'm so lucky to exist in a space that is so unique because everyone hates it. We continue on. And I think also it's the plight of people who won't leave somewhere that they've been anchored to, despite laws and systems and structures that continue to isolate and divide and hurt. And I think that there's something very powerful in staying put and demanding better and demanding accountability from the systems around us and in asking for change. And so I think that Houston has become what it is because people refuse to leave and because people, namely Black people, namely brown people, colonized people, continue to create the Houston that they want to exist in. And I'm lucky to be able to create with or be a part of that. So whenever I think about Houston, I'm like, oh my God, I'm so happy. But I also hate it because all of my exes are here and that is not good. So yeah, major out. But we ball.
I love that. And I also love the history lesson. Much appreciated. We only say no history because if you don't want to share, you don't have to share, but we're always here for history. And I really appreciate what you said about there being power to staying in a place and growing and she's in a place. Obviously, there are layers and layers and nuance to that. Obviously, staying in a place where you're in immediate physical harm's way is different than staying somewhere and working through the discomfort and difficulty of not agreeing with everything that a place does. And I think a lot about how we function in the present day can make it feel very easy to just pick up and leave if things feel hard or if we don't agree with what's happening. Because in a lot of ways it is. It's a lot easier to pick up and leave than it was a decade, 2 decades ago, even. But that really shifts our ability to ground ourselves in community in a way that is really sustaining and important for us because our communities give us everything. They give us joy and support and love, and they give us exes as well. I think that there's a lot to be said for that. And I love every time I see posts about Houston and your community and all of the things that are happening in your community. I think it's really dope. And I want to see that from more people.
So annoying. I make fun of myself. My partner everyone makes fun of me. I'm like Houston's biggest mascot, but also there are problems like the walkability in the city is not, there's no walkability. The public transportation system is terrible. The heat is excruciating and we don't have public cooling centers or there's no way for unhoused people to get relief from the heat or even the cold or the humidity or anything like that. So I think there's a lot. I love this city, but there is a lot that needs to be done. And I think that there are people doing it. A lot of the shows that are put on in the city, whether it be queer or shows for people of color, oftentimes the proceeds from shows will go to different charities or different mutual aid systems or things like that. Like one of the shows I did was for the people. It was their opening show in benefit of the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund, but they had clothes, like clothing lines set up and it was take what you need and that sort of thing. So I also think shows, art shows, music shows, places where community forms, queer community forms a lot of the time, especially the queer community who are working class, who are rooted in the struggles of working class people. There's this sense of mutual aid, a sense of trying to give back to the community that brought you up. And I think that when Jessie was asking about the queerness, I think queerness is an identity, but I also think queerness is an agreement in a way for me and for a lot of the people in my community to be there for each other and to be there for other people. And I think I don't know if it's Houston specific or if there's just some really dope people around me and I got lucky, but I think that when the city doesn't show up for us, we show up for each other. And I think that is really important until we fight the city, which should happen immediately. Because also, and this is a separate rant, but closing down the Houston Independent School District libraries and making them detention centers right now, which is also terrible. So there have been protests about that. Like the city sucks. Like it sucks, but we keep fighting, I suppose.
No, I feel like you honestly led me right into the next thing I was going to ask. So the tandems that we're going on are actually perfect. They keep leading into each other. I feel like a lot of what you're touching on is just oftentimes it is the people in the community that make a place as special as it is. I'm going to assume this is relevant for all of us, but it's never the government or the people running the city or the city infrastructure that makes a city important or special to us. It really is the community within it. And I think queer community is so powerful and so moving in that way that it really does provide so much of what we need for each other and to live full and thriving lives. And I wanted to talk a little bit about two different pieces of writing that you put out recently. One in New Voices, that I guess is a short writing excerpt, and one that is, I think, just on your Instagram. And both of them are about your friend Audrey. And I wanted to just give you space to talk a little bit about Audrey, just because it feels as though they were someone who is really important and significant in your life. And then, yeah, and then I'll move into some of the specific things that I wanted to pick from those pieces.
Yeah, thank you. I'm grateful for that space. Audrey is a Houston based organizer who went to University of Houston, UH. And I first met Audrey in a church, actually, which is very funny, I think. I didn't burn up when I walked in, surprisingly. But I met Audrey in a church because it was a part of the Karen Kadwa Kadwa Solidarity Group, which is the local indigenous population here. And they were working to stop construction on their land, I think on a waterway. I think there was going to be pipes built or something to that effect. It was a few years ago. And I met Audrey because Audrey was leading the space. And I didn't know who Audrey was, but Audrey knew who I was because of my Twitter, which is very embarrassing, by the way. I hate that so much. And Audrey was like, "Are you that person on Twitter?" And I was like, "Probably, yeah." And so we went through that. And Audrey, I knew Audrey very briefly in the grand scheme of the universe, but I think Audrey is one of the people who impacted me the most in terms of coming into organizing and coming into queer identity, because Audrey also introduced and opened up a world for me of people who now are really close to my heart and connected me to people who I am so thankful to now treasure and to love. And I think Audrey also cared so deeply for her city and for her spaces and for her spirituality. Audrey was a very spiritual person who wanted to be a religious leader, a spiritual leader when she got older, and she was very involved in her church and really interested in multi-faith togetherness and unity. And I really love that. And Audrey and I had conversations about Judaism that really impacted the way I see myself and the way I see my Jewishness. And I feel so grateful to have experienced those comments and conversations. And Audrey was also one of the first people to show up for me when things were bad. And one of the first people in my community to be like, "I'm here." And I think that was also something really special to me. And I think that when you're 20 something and really scared and really alone and you don't really know your place, having someone who will introduce you to a world of people to guide you and give you friendship is something so invaluable and so precious. And I'm really grateful to have known Audrey, to continue to know Audrey, and to know their spaces and people, because I need to hold my friends closer, I think, sometimes, and be more grateful and care a little more. Or even if not care a little more, show that I care a little more. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I think that's really special. And I think all the ways that you feel about her really show up in your writing in ways that were really moving for me to read. And I'm sure moving for anyone else who read or listened to you read. One of the things that I wanted to highlight is from the New Voices piece where you said that pride is also grief and it is also mourning, and that is okay. I will make space for loss, and that is also pride. And then you simultaneously, in another piece where you're talking about Audrey, saying, "We're still here and we're dancing." So I feel like there's this balance between the joy and the grief that is so hyper present in queerness and in queer spaces and in queer history and queer present day myth. And yeah, I just think trying to think of what my question is from some of this, besides the fact that I just think it is powerful and important to acknowledge the grief and loss and pain and mourning that exists within queerness, and also the joy and life source and happiness and dancing that exists in queerness. But I guess my question from those things is, do you feel as though your art has been a helpful space to to process both of those things, like the joy and the pain.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I appreciate your observation because I think it's very true. Yeah, I think my art has been, besides, I think I've processed grief and loss and all my, like, the spectrum of emotions in relation to queerness, first through community and then through art. I think my art exists as a function of my lived experience. I don't know. I recently went through the process of applying to MFA schools. I applied to 12 of them. I didn't get into any for my writing, which fucking sucks, but they're lost. But I remember applying and being like, this is such fucking bullshit. I'm sorry, but it is. And writing, there's this idea of the workshop, which is also bullshit, where everyone goes around the room and they read each other's work and try to help each other become quote unquote better writers. I think that's so manufactured. I think having a space where you have to dissect and interrogate art is manufactured. I don't believe in manufactured art. I can't ever believe in that. I think that it's gross and I think that it's soulless. And I don't like that. That's why I don't like the classroom. I don't like the classroom as a space for making art. And even though beautiful and valuable art can be made and shared in the classroom, I think the classroom is a prison. And I do not think the classroom is an effective space for that. And so I've never been able to just make art. I think that art, good art, and I do believe in good art. I don't think that art is subjective. I think there's good art and bad art. And I believe that good art exists as a function of living. And I think that I can't process through art if I don't have anything to process. And I think that I do that through engaging with my community. And so I think that I knew I wanted to write about losing Audrey. And I'm not the main character of Audrey's story in any way. And I want to make that so clear. I am just someone who loved and lost so many others. I wanted to hold space for the gravity of my feelings because I am the main character of my own life. And I needed to do that, but I knew that I needed to first engage with the people around me and the people who also loved Audrey and the people who held space with Audrey before I did that, because I think it's so silly and self-absorbed and narcissistic to just write. I guess maybe that's an unpopular opinion, but I think if you're just writing immediately after something happens to you, maybe that can be helpful to some people, but not to me. I think that I need to be with my community first. And even people I don't like, I need to be with them, even if they're not in my community. I think I need to experience how people are feeling and how people are coping and how people are engaging, because I don't think that it's right to write about something that has impacted more people than you and to just do it without any sort of input from them. And in losing Audrey, I think the first thing I did was call my friends and text my friends and just figure out where everyone else was at and spend time with some people and just exist with them for a while. And I think it's really hard for me to write while processing grief afterwards, but I also think it's such an impetus for writing for me. And so I think a lot of my writing, when I process these things, is me crying and then typing and then taking a break and crying and then typing and crying. And so I think it's very much emotional, but I would say that art is so important to the way that I process, and not so much secondarily to engaging with community, but alongside it. And I think you're right when you said the grief and joy being queerness, or of being queer and like, engaging with queerness is very real. Because I think that queer people aren't afforded the ability to just experience joy, because someone is going to kill themselves, that someone's going to die of AIDS, that someone's going to perish in a mass shooting, that someone's going to be hate crime. Like, you never know what's going to happen. And that sucks. But I think it also adds a level of hypervigilance to existence and to joy. And I think it intensifies joy to a certain degree. And for me, at least, I think in losing people who I've loved so much as a result of transphobia and as a result of these awful systems of oppression that seek to stamp out queerness, I think that I have decided for them to appreciate the joy more and to revel in it more and to write about that more. And I think my challenge for myself after losing Audrey is going to be to write joy more often, because I think that it is not fair to only write sadness in someone's memory. I think that's wrong, especially someone who was so joyful. And so I think, yes, my art is a place to process both the grief, but I want it to be a place to process the joy too, because I don't think I take enough time to do that.
I'm listening to you talk and I'm reflecting on your writing. I'm thinking of all the Jewish themes that come through because of what I do and because of this podcast and everything. I'm so focused on the Judaism of it all. And what you're sharing about in grief and in mourning, coming together with friends and being together, even if it feels awkward or uncomfortable, is the concept behind Shiva. I just went to one of my first strangers, Shivas, and I was like, is this right? And everyone was like, this is literally what we want you to do in the community, is just show up for people, even if you never knew them, because just being with people makes us feel better. And so that feels so core to Judaism and so core to everything you're talking about. And going back a little bit further, when you were talking about meeting Audrey and you were talking about that kind of connection or that spiritual energy matching that just happened, and it felt so different and so clear. And it reminded me of this line from this piece of writing that you have, which I also have this problem where I read people's work to them and then tell them all the things it made me think of. And then they're like, yeah, that wasn't where I was going with it at all. So feel free to just tell me everything I'm saying is wrong. But this part that I'm going to read to you, the water was like a mikveh. It was uncharacteristically clear. I thought of my conversations with Audrey about Judaism. I thought of Audrey's spirit and how she did not see death as the end. I saw Audrey in the hermit crab scuttling slow enough for me to pick up, and I felt her in the fish that crowded at my feet. They darted too quickly for me to grasp. I am starting to see Audrey in everything beautiful, in her friends, in the water. And so it's so good. And of course, I'm picking up on the mikveh and uncharacteristically clear. That line is just sticking with me because the mikveh being this ritual that originated for quote unquote purity of a female quote unquote's body, and this very close-minded ritual that we are all reclaiming to really explore, like, what does it mean to heal ourselves through these ritual practices and water and connecting back to the earth and the amazing expansive ways mikveh practice has developed recently. And I was thinking about that uncharacteristically clear thing, that when everything else feels muddled or difficult or sad or heavy, having these moments of connection that feel so clear and so valuable. And I think it's what you're talking about too, with the joy and the grief. It's the hermit crab and it's the heaviness of sitting with loss and finding the beauty in all of that. So it reminded me of Tisha B'Av. It reminded me of all of these things where we have to hold a little joy even when we are grieving so heavily, because we can't get stuck in the grief. And so wanted to open that up to talking about mikveh, particularly if that was your connection here and you wanted to speak on it, or continuing the path of joy and green and the symbolism in this piece.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that beautiful reading. I'm very honored, both of you, for reading. That was, whoa, wow. Am I a good writer or are you just a good reader? It was really tough for me, I think. Tough for everyone. And losing Audrey, when I found out, I was at a local art cafe with two of my closest friends, and they didn't know Audrey, but I was on Instagram clicking through a story and I saw a memorial and I thought, there's no way that it's the same person. And so I just started texting and calling. And I was just in public when I found that out, and I don't even know. I guess I don't wish I hadn't been, but it was hard. It's hard to find something like when you start crying in public, it's rough. I locked myself in the cafe bathroom and I called one of my other friends and I was like, "Is it true?" And there was just a long silence on the phone. And it was just, that moment was just like when your heart clenches and you're waiting for the ball to drop. And I was just so broken. Audrey lived in my apartment complex, and it was so hard coming back here and walking around and being like, oh my God, because I felt like something was wrong. I felt like I was looking at things I shouldn't, walking in places I shouldn't be. I felt very out of place in my own space. And that's such a strange feeling. And it's not Audrey's fault or anyone's fault. I think it's just the nature of grief. And my partner, who's also Jewish, let me cry for 2-3 days and then was like, we need to get out. Like, you need to leave because this is just not, it wasn't healthy. I don't know. And so they were like, we should go to the beach. And I was like, that doesn't feel right. And they were like, no, we should. And I was like, okay. But it felt wrong because I was like, is it right to go to the beach when you find out that your friend just died? And I kind of learned that there's no right or wrong way to handle feeling loss. And I went, and I don't know if you guys know, Galveston is like shit island. It is disgusting. That place, the water is constantly brown. They did a fecal test and there's a lot of poop in that water. It is the grossest beach. People won't get in it. There's trash on the beach. It's just the worst. I love it, but it's the worst. And we went and it was blue. And it must have been after a storm or something, but I'd never seen water in like the South that clear. And my partner hadn't either. And they were amazed because you could see all the way down to your feet, which is so strange for the bay because the Mississippi River drains into Galveston and pollutes it with dirt and all these things, right? And I could see my toes and I could see everything, every grain of sand. And I was just I think I was so numb after experiencing grief that seeing that felt so euphoric. And I was just, the first thing it reminded me of was a mikvah, because Audrey and I had talked a lot about conversion to Judaism and what that looked like and what that was about, because that was something Audrey was interested in from the lens of spirituality. And so that was something we had communicated to each other a lot about. And I just immediately was like, wow, the coincidence that's happening right now is so deeply felt by me that I'm going to decide it's not a coincidence, because I need it not to be, for my own sake of healing. And I think that there's something so beautiful about the idea of mikvah. And I think the idea of mikvah, like I have so many friends from non-traditional or non-denominational backgrounds who will go with their friends to a pool of water and do a mikvah, so, like, ritual with each other. And some people might say that's not halachic. I think it counts, because I think there's something very beautiful about that. And I think for me, it really closely reminded me of my mikvah experiences and what that felt like. And I think there's something so just deeply confronting about you're forced to reckon with yourself, and you're forced to feel the world around you, and you're forced to embrace everything you're feeling, at least for me, in mikvah. And I talked a little bit, I don't know if you guys know Mayim Haim, but it's the mikvah. Yeah, I love them. But I participated in there. They did the Jew of Color. It was called Let Justice Rise Up, I think, something like that. And it was supposed to be like, what are our connections to mikvah from the lens of being people who come from colonized backgrounds? How do we see water in ways that aren't necessarily Ashkenazi in origin? And for my section, I talked a little bit about the fact that in South Asia, the idea of river is very important. And there's this river that you traditionally, when someone passes away, you put their ash in, right? Because it's meant to be a spiritual experience. And I think there is something about water and about both origins and the closing of a book, like the end of a life, the passing. I think that there's something very cyclical about mikvah and very special to me. And I also think, being a convert, mikvah will never not be important to me. I think it will always be. Like, when I think of my origin in Jewishness, I always remember mikvah, because that's something that's so important to me, is just that experience of going to the mikvah with my family, and my parents forgetting the nice towels. So we had to use like the old beach towels in the back of our car, which was so embarrassing. And the rabbis being like, you have old beach towels. I don't know. To me, it's such a point of origin, my Jewishness. A lot of my friendships with Audrey began with talking about conversion, the beginning of feeling through grief and letting it pass. I love mikvah. I love the notion. I love the place. I love the space. I love the fact that so many people whom I adore and treasure are reclaiming mikvah, because, again, like you said, I think the origins of mikvah are beautiful, but are also very antiquated. And I think it's become a source of justice and a source of taking back the self for a lot of people. And I think that's very special.
Could not agree more. I'm obsessed with the mikvah, specifically the reclamation of it. We've talked about the mikvah, I feel like, a lot during our conversation on the podcast, just because, yeah, there's something so moving about that. And I love thinking about mikvah as a way of moving through grief and loss, and also as a way of naming and claiming and celebration. There's so many incredible ways that mikvah can be used, especially as we begin to reclaim it. Yeah, and just like there are all of these new, I say new, I'm sure they've been there forever, but prayers for using the mikvah to mark gender transition or name change related to gender identity, which are just so special and beautiful and amazing. And I love that you tied that all together, because I do think that, yeah, the queering the mikvah and spaces like Mayim Haim and Queer Mikvah Project are just one of those ties between Judaism and queerness that feels really powerful and strong. This is sort of related. Something you said at the end made me think of it, and now I can't remember what the tie was, but that's okay. We're going to talk about it anyway. This might be a deviation from grief and queerness a little bit, but I actually found a poem that you wrote, found, like, it is there for everyone, but that was published in the Santa Clara Review in 2022. And my assumption is that it's about your Hebrew age, which I thought was really crazy, because a lot of Naomi is my name. And I didn't realize that was your Hebrew name.
Hebrew name, I love as well. Or
no, it's my name. My government is Alana, not Alona.
Yeah, the name. That's so funny.
And I didn't realize that, obviously. And I was looking at it and I was like, that's so unbelievable. My Hebrew name is actually completely different than my government. But my parents named me with Ilana Naomi in mind as being also Jewish infused and Hebrew and whatnot. So obviously the poem resonated extra deeply with me because I was like, oh shit, that's crazy. But I also loved usage of they and them when talking about God, which I just in general really like when people do. And I also, I don't know if this is on purpose or not, but talking about using the oak branches for the crown because Alana means oak tree. I loved, and I only know that because that's why my parents named me that. And so, yeah, there's so much delicious Jewishness in there and so many tiny things snuck throughout that I really appreciated from a personal stance. But I was curious, just more generally, what does writing poetry about Judaism or infused with Judaism feel like for you, mean for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I again was unbelievably fortunate to go to a modern Orthodox Jewish day school as a kid. And I'm very thankful my parents put me in one. And something that we would do during Shacharit every morning is pray and look at Psalms, Tehillim. And I think that for me, my Jewishness is so interconnected to poetry and to the idea of putting as much spirituality as possible into words and creating the something from nothing. And I think for me, Tehillim has been such a source of strength. And it's something I look back on when I'm really struggling for words, when I don't feel like I have any good ones. And I think that also just throughout my Jewish life, I've been able to access or have been given the opportunity to access words in so many different ways and in so many different formats. My family attended a Reform synagogue when I was a kid, Temple Emmanuel Dallas, which is amazing, continues to be amazing. I love them. And the Reform Siddur, I think it was Mishkan Tefillah, that's it. They use the Mishkan Tefillah kind of Siddur, and it's a very poetic layout. It pulls poetry. The authors pull poetry. They pull a lot of modern poets and a lot of modern Jewish poets and renditions of different things. And the Siddur doesn't exclusively use he, him pronouns, often uses they for God, as far as I remember. And I think for me growing up, is that being my main source of such a home. When I open that up, I feel like I'm like 11. And I think for me, the layout of that book, in terms of just the visuals and also in terms of the language, really gave me a lot as a kid. And I think that because of that and because of so many other things that I'm so grateful to have experienced, that Judaism is poetry in a lot of ways. And I think that also with regard to the naming, I'm really interested in both the use of Hebrew lettering and the use of the Jewish relationship to numbers in art, in poetry. I think multilingual poetry is something, with Hebrew specifically, is something I'm really interested in creating and in reading and in engaging with, because I don't think there's much out there, especially in the diaspora. And I think that's such a shame. I think that there's not a lot of poetry out there that I am aware of. Maybe there is, and I'm just not aware, that utilizes Yiddish and utilizes Ladino and utilizes Judeo-Malayalam and things like that. And I think we're right now starting to see this resurgence of young people who want to create multilingual poetry and writing that reflects their identity, their Jewish identity, reflects the Jewish identity of the people who have come before them. And so I say this all the time, but now people are like, if I belong in the 60s, I should have been born in the 60s or whatever. I don't know. I feel so fortunate to be born in this time and place because I think I get to experience and live through this kind of revival of Jewish diasporic poetry. And I think that's something that I am super hyped about. That's just really cool. I know it's fucking awesome. I love that. I like the fact that the people around me and the people in my circles and the people I don't even know are making art that is Jewish and that is also a product of diaspora, because I only speak English and Hebrew. I don't speak anything else. So I want to see art that reflects that. And I'm seeing it and I'm making it. And I think that's so cool. And I also think that it's the result of places, publications, platforms, different sites, and different people creating mediums where that is considered artful. Because I also think as a result of Zionism and Ashkenazi normativity and a whole host of other things, that multilingual diasporic poetry and art is not something that has been given enough funding, attention, like et cetera, et cetera. And so I think now that we're seeing the rise of digital Jewishness and digital Judaism and the accessibility that comes with that, and also the fact that now it's okay to be brown and Jewish to some people, that there's a lot of really cool art that I get to see that maybe I wouldn't have seen if I had been born at any other time. Not to say there isn't a history or lineage of Black, brown, Asian, etc. Jewish artists out there. There is. But the art I'm seeing now is really cool too.
Yes. Literally everything you kept saying, I kept being like, okay, I want to pull that. I want to pull that. And there was just so much goodness. First of all, I don't know if you listened to our episode from last week, but if you didn't, that's exactly what we talked about. Really language as art, especially in the diaspora. But definitely we talked to Sarah, who is incredible and knows Ladino and writes with Ladino. And we talked a lot about what you just spoke about, which is young people reclaiming that and using that in their art. And I also think it is so important to recognize that we are at a time where we have access to forms of art that whether or not they were happening, we wouldn't really have been able to access them in the same way that we do now. And we do have this platform and ability to access these forms of art that are being created in a way that just wouldn't have really been possible before. I had never really thought about the layout of that specific Siddur. And because we used the same one, we also grew up in a Reform temple. And I actually used to love flipping through the pages of that during services when I wasn't paying attention because it was full of so many little poetry excerpts. And I love the idea that Judaism is full of poetry and Judaism is poetry. And there's so many beautiful tie-ins that exist. And I just love that you highlighted that. Which leads me to one of our last questions. Not our last yet. I feel again, we've been dancing around this the whole time, but we haven't talked explicitly about it. I think it bears asking. What do you think of the idea of art as resistance? And do you feel as though you make art as a form of resistance?
Yeah, that's a good question. I absolutely love resistance. I love that as a material reality and as an artistic expression. I just wrote a piece for Institute for Palestine Studies USA that talks about that and about writing and digital media. I guess it is art because I talk about video. I got to interview two really cool folks, not Jewish as far as I know, but Palestinian and South Asian, to talk about resistance and resistance in the form of a multimedia delivery. And I think that we are so fortunate. I am so fortunate. All of us are so fortunate to have, like you were saying, access. Well, the internet is so cool. And it's just every single thing that has ever happened, basically, that hasn't been erased is in there. And I think I feel very fortunate to be able to access so many forms of resistance through art online. And I feel like that's been a place that I've been able to see resistance take place. I think something that's really been important to me are Palestinian resistance posters. There are some accounts, I think there are two accounts that bring back, rerun, or reprint Palestinian resistance posters. And I think that those are beautiful. And I think that those are powerful and urgent. And I also think that there's a lot of Palestinian art online being made and shared from Palestine and also from exile that has to do with resistance and speaks to resistance. And I also think there's a lot of other art out there from people who are experiencing systemic and structural struggles who are creating artful resistance. And I think there's a line though, like I don't think aestheticizing resistance is always the right move, but I definitely think that art as an act of resistance is certainly possible and that there's a long history of it and that it's something that I think colonized peoples have been using for hundreds and hundreds of years, if not thousands, to express themselves and express the ways in which we continue to hold heritage and hold identity. And I think that one of the most powerful forms of colonialism is erasure. And that's the erasure of art, that's the erasure of literature, the erasure of books, those sorts of things. The first step in a lot of forms of colonialism is erasure and the destruction of culture and the destruction of a group of people. So you could say they were never there, right? And so many different groups of people have experienced this. And something that comes to mind for me growing up in a community that had many Ashkenazi people in it is the Holocaust and the destruction of books and the destruction of paper, and the idea of making sure that there isn't art around that people could use to demonstrate culture. So in a lot of ways, I think even just the existence of art from a group experiencing material struggle is resistance, right? I think that that phrase existence is resistance. I think that's true. I think the fact that Palestinian people continue to exist and resist and live in Palestine, that is resistance. And I feel very humbled and very grateful to the artists from Palestine, from other occupied places, from Kashmir, from all around the world. Even here locally, there are so many artists in Houston who engage in kind of artful resistance. And I feel very humbled to be able to experience that and engage with that art, because the other thing with art as resistance is access too. Is I feel like there are so many barriers of access to art. And I think art as resistance begs for, or even requires, free public access. And I think that's also something I love about the internet, is there's just so many ways to get a hold of art, and specifically art from Black, Indigenous people of color. But yeah, I definitely see art as resistance. I feel like a lot of my art, even if I'm not naming it as resistance, is resistance to a lot of things, like systemic barriers placed in the face of people with disabilities, or gendered violence and resistance to that. And so I think that art as resistance is one of the most powerful mechanisms of survival that there is. And it's also, it's preservation of the people and of a group, of kind of a generation. And I think that's also really powerful too. Yeah, I love that. I love that question.
Thank you so much for sharing all that. And shout out to the internet, because that's how we know Anna as well. So we are deeply grateful. Yeah,
It's terrible though, but
I know. Oh, yeah. We go back and forth all the time, but we wouldn't have the incredible community we have, and we wouldn't get to read your work and engage with you had we not had the internet. So we are incredibly grateful to the internet for Anna. But I do have to ask the worst question of the whole podcast, which is the last one. And it's, if you could leave all our listeners with one message, what would it be? Despite the fact that you had all this wisdom to share, one message, what would you leave it at?
that's a really hard question. I think one of the most transformative things I've heard, it's not my wisdom that I'm going to leave the readers with, it's actually someone else's, but I had a professor this last semester, KSA Layman. He's awesome and really dope and cool and stuff. And he wrote this super cool memoir called Heavy. It's also really good, but he's awesome. And we were in class and I was feeling real frustrated because I wasn't getting anything published. And I was like, man, I want to deal with Penguin Random House. And he just stopped the class and he was like, you want to deal with Penguin Random House? You want to write a book for Penguin Random House? And I was like, yeah, I do. And he was like, you don't want to write, you don't want to make art for someone or something that's going to suck your soul out. And I was like, yeah, actually, you're right. And he talked to me into the class about who we make art for and the impetus of art and how that is a choice in itself. And he talked about his experience of realizing that what's the point in making art for people who want to kill you and kill your friends, and people who want to destroy you and destroy your friends? Why not make art for your friends? And he was like, make art for your friends, Anna. Do that. Just make art for your friends. That is powerful. And ever since he said that, I've been making art for my friends. And I have produced the only art that I want to be circulated presently for my friend. No one's going to see it except my friends. And I think that's really fucking cool. And I like the idea of making art for my friends because, yeah, a lot of people want us dead, but I'm going to make art instead. And I think that's something that's super awesome. And I think if your listeners take one thing away from this, that it would be that you should make art for your friends and for yourself and not for anyone else. And especially not for people who hate you. Because what's the point of writing a book for Penguin Random House? Like, I could also just write a little poem and draw a little cartoon for my friend down the street. And that has way more power than selling something. So anti-capitalist, but yeah, make art for your buddies.
I think we'd all make art we are happier with if we were just making art for our friends. So I would love that as a message to leave us with. Thank you so much for that message and for being with us and for sharing all of the wisdom that you've shared in our time together. It is always such a pleasure to talk to you, and actually special to talk to you in the context of your artwork and Obviously, the work that you do around anti-Zionism is incredible, but it's nice to also just be able to talk about your art and hear about that from a different way. We, of course, want to ask if there's any upcoming work you want to highlight that people should find. And I will be asking you to let us know about any Houston organizations we should highlight in the description of the episode. So now is the time for you to highlight any of that.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a show and there is an organization that I think is so dope and that I am always supporting. So I mentioned this earlier, but there is a group called For the People, which is a Houston based Black, Middle Eastern, and Latina led collaborative booking label. And they have a show coming up this October. And yeah, I think keeping an eye out for the work that For the People does is really cool because also those are my pals and they're pretty awesome.
We will definitely be plugging and sharing anything when it's already been shared, and we inevitably see you share it. Thank you again. And for everyone listening, join us again next week when we're going to be talking to Micah Bazan, who is a visual artist and cultural strategist who works with social justice movements to reimagine the world. And we'll see you all then.